Hello everyone, Nick the DM here, and it has been quite some time since I have done a D&D book review. Some of you may know, as I mention it often, that I am working my way through the entire Forgotten Realms library, and that has been a very wild ride, to say the least. I'm nowhere close to done, but I've been doing it for quite some time. Anyways, since it has been so long, I thought, what better way to restart this series than at the beginning, by which I mean the very first trilogy of the Forgotten Realms, the Moonshae Trilogy. And also, I thought I would rework how I do these videos. Originally, I tried to avoid spoilers to, not spoil the novels so others could enjoy them. But that ends up being somewhat unentertaining or dry, especially for those who have already read the books. So here's what's happening. The first part of these videos will be a quick, spoiler-free review for stuff like the general pacing, character writing, the rough story outline, just to set your expectations without revealing anything major. Following that, I will give a summary of the story and dive into some specific details of stuff that I either really liked or really didn't, and those portions of the videos will be longer proportional to how strong my feelings are about the books. I will put a chapter indentation in the video, and I will also tell you directly when I am going to start spoiling the novels, so you can drop out if necessary. Now, with that out of the way, let us talk about the Moonshae Trilogy. This trilogy, written by Douglas Niles, was the first completed trilogy published within the Forgotten Realms setting, with the first book of this trilogy being the very first Forgotten Realms novel. The Moonshae Trilogy includes the novels Darkwalker on Moonshae, Black Wizards, and Darkwell. The first thing I have to say about this trilogy is that my expectations were set incredibly high for entirely biased reasons. See, I got the reprint of this trilogy, and the first book, Darkwalker on Moonshae, included a glowing introduction of the book by one R.A. Salvatore, the author of one of my all-time favorite book series, The Legend of Drizzt. To summarize, Salvatore told the story of how he was looking to hand over a manuscript of his first novel to TSR, but they refused him, saying that they only had room on their schedule for a Forgotten Realms novel. Salvatore had no idea what that was, and was given a copy of Darkwalker on Moonshae to read. The introduction then became a paragraph of praise and compliment for this novel, also hinting that it may have influenced Salvatore's decision to write for the Forgotten Realms. So the first thing I read upon cracking open the book is a commendation from one of my favorite authors. You can understand why I had high hopes. But were my expectations met? Not really. Now, the Moonshae Trilogy is in no way a bad series, I want to make that very clear, but it didn't blow me away like I expected it to. The trilogy follows our protagonist, Tristan Kendrick, the Prince of the Kingdom of Corwell on the Moonshae Isles. Along with Tristan, the rest of the main cast includes Robin, his adopted sister and love interest. It's weird, we'll get into it. Then there is Paldo, a halfling who I really don't remember much of. Next is Dareth, a rogue who joins the group pretty early on, and Tristan's new moorhound hunting dog, Canthus. Canthus is not exactly a main character, but I kind of included him. I wouldn't say he was the Scooby of the group, but he was notable nonetheless. The series focuses on our main cast as a dark force attempts to subjugate the Moonshae Isles, fighting and corrupting the natural force that resides in that beautiful land. The focus of the novels is, of course, on our main crew, but it does switch over to the perspectives of the Dark Force and the primal spirit of the Isles known as the Earth Mother. Whenever we have other such antagonists, like the Dark Force's allies or whatever, we will focus on them as well, and sometimes the book does switch to other players within the Moonshae Isles, but they're of less note for this overall review. Throughout this trilogy, the main cast are caught up in wars, fight monsters, struggle with new responsibilities, venture to dangerous new environments, and maneuver through tricky politics and deceptions. The characters are very interesting, each with their own unique goals and some conflicting interests, but it balances out well. I sometimes find characters without conflict just feel dull, but on the other hand, characters who constantly experience the same pitfalls and arguments again and again start to drag on and feel monotonous. The pacing of the story was also good. Between the alternating perspectives and the actual timeline of the adventures, I never felt lost or felt like the novel was dragging its feet to slow you down. At the same time, Douglas Niles gave readers enough time to digest new information and ponder any mysteries they stumbled upon, and the final scenes of each book actually gave me time to feel like I was in the scene. I've read way too many novels where the final scene is just so rushed and strung together that it ends up feeling less than satisfying. That isn't to say the trilogy is perfect. The first thing that felt out of place to me was the setting. The entirety of this trilogy takes place on the Moonshae Isles, a collection of islands west of the Sword Coast, pretty much directly west of Baldur's Gate. The good thing about this is we get to explore this area through the characters, and the isles are pretty much independent, so each island really only interacts with the other islands a majority of the time. At the same time, this makes it feel almost like the novels aren't within the Forgotten Realms. Even in R.A. Salvatore's introduction to Darkwalker on Moonshae, he explained that he thought the Moonshae Isles were the Forgotten Realms at first, because the novels make little to no mention of the rest of Faerun for the most part, maybe a little obscure mention here or there or a character name, but it's not really overall connected, it doesn't feel. Yet, this is neither entirely good nor bad. As the first Forgotten Realms novel, I would expect to hear more about what the entire setting entails. Yet, at the same time, as someone who has researched and read much of the Forgotten Realms, the setting is way too vast and may overwhelm most stories if readers aren't yet familiar with the setting. Honestly, I enjoy most Forgotten Realms books because they make use of the lore I'm familiar with. However, the Moonshae Trilogy is enjoyable despite not knowing anything about it. If you have no idea what the Forgotten Realms are, you can pick this up and enjoy it. If you do know what the Forgotten Realms are, you can read it and also draw a few conclusions or connections. But one other tiny detail was that some of the characters just felt like they were there to fill out space. Like I said earlier, I don't remember almost anything about Paldo. Even right now, as I'm running through the story in my head, I don't remember him being relevant. Though as I skimmed through the novels for the latter part of this review, I did find he was a bit more important than I remembered. Just a little bit. At the same time, a much more memorable character, Dareth, felt like he was squeezed into the group. His interaction within the story itself, that was fine. The pacing and importance of his own story within the second novel, not so great. Overall, he was introduced and added a bit abruptly, and the brief period where we explored more about his history and backstory felt like it was expedited just to make sure it fit in the novel. But with all that said, the Moonshae Trilogy is a great example of an archetypical fantasy series. We are given a story with kingdoms, princes, war, magic, prophecy, monsters, different societies and species, and companionship. Any issues I have with the novels are minute at best, and while the trilogy is not my favorite, it is still a really good series. Lastly, for the spoiler-free portion, I, as always, need to mention the covers of the books. Obviously, I got the reprinted covers, but I did a quick crystal ball search to find the originals. Honestly, most of these are really good, and I don't mean in art quality, that's usually good. I'm looking for things like, does it properly portray the novel? Do the characters look accurate to their descriptions? Is it just two people standing back to back on the cover with little relation to the theme of the book? That latter option happens far too often in pre-2000s novels. The only cover that I have the smallest of problems with is the original English cover of Black Wizards. Not because there's anything wrong with the depictions of the characters, I just read the entire trilogy picturing Tristan without a beard. Tristan was described with a beard in the first few pages of Chapter 1 of Darkwalker on Moonshae, but I know very few 19 to 20-year-old people who can grow a full beard. So when I read how old he was, I think my brain just immediately shaved him. So no real issues with the covers, they all look really good and they all fit the theme of the book, it's just something that I messed up personally. Now, that was the spoiler-free review. From this point on, I will be detailing the story of the Moonshae Trilogy and focusing on parts that stood out to me. You've been warned, here we go. The first novel, Darkwalker on Moonshae, is fairly linear. We start in late winter with the primal spirit of the Moonshae Isles, the Earth Mother. She's not a deity, more like the aspect of the Isles themselves, which gets somewhat confusing considering the books often refer to her as the goddess, but she doesn't have any clerics who worship her, just druids who tend to the nature of the Isles. The Earth Mother is in pain because one of the moon wells, the magical pools of water sacred to her and her druids, is corrupted, and a creature called the Beast would soon emerge to stalk the land. Moving on to the story's protagonists, we start with Tristan Kendrick, Prince of Cair Corwell, who is around 19 at this time. Cair Corwell is having a festival, and Tristan is perusing the outdoor market, buying his dog Canthus from Paldo. As he's negotiating over the price of his new dog, Robin enters the scene. As Tristan goes to reach for his coin purse, he finds it's been stolen, but catches a glimpse of a red-cloaked figure who disappears into the crowd. A chase ensues, they fight, and the rogue bests Tristan, but doesn't harm him, stating that he just wanted to see if he could beat him. We learn that this rogue is Dareth, a young man who hails from distant Calamshan. However, after the brief scuffle, Dareth is then surrounded by the guards. Arian, a veteran man-at-arms, captures Dareth and drags him off. Robin pleads with Tristan to save Dareth because if he goes before the king, he will be executed for assaulting the prince. Tristan begrudgingly agrees, jealous over how much concern Robin is showing towards this stranger, and they follow. Meanwhile, from the corrupted moonwell, dubbed the Darkwell, the Beast rose. Knowing his ancient enemy, the Earth Mother, must be vulnerable for him to be able to rise and walk on the Isles. Using much coaxing and enchantment, the Beast, also called Khazgarath or Khazgarath depending on the spelling, it changes between sourcebooks and novels, began summoning the Firbolgs, his ancient minions, and also said to be the cousins of the Beast himself. The story we are told is that the Firbolgs were the first spawn of the Beast, brought to the Moonshae Isles by Khazgarath in the distant past. After summoning his minions, Khazgarath slew a herd of cattle, transformed into a great bull, and then ambushed the human couple who tended the cattle. The Beast then took on the guise of a human woman, stole clothes, and continued on its way. Back to Tristan and crew, Tristan, Robin, and Dareth all become acquainted as Dareth is escorted towards the castle. We learn Robin was raised by the king to be his ward after she was orphaned, but Tristan makes it very clear that they aren't related. We also learn that Dareth is conveniently a master trainer of dogs. Tristan then dismisses Arian, and when arriving before the king, requests that they hire Dareth as the royal hound master. We move our perspective to Grunark the Red, king of Norland of the Moonshae Isles, sailing to Iron Keep, the fortress of Thelgar Ironhand, the most powerful king of the Northmen. The Northmen are, to draw a familiar comparison, the Vikings of the Moonshae Isles, making Grunark a Viking king. Grunark seeks to make an alliance for the purpose of raiding the folk in the summer. Just to break this down, the Moonshae Isles are predominantly populated by humans, which are separated into two societies. The folk, those like Tristan and Robin, who are most skilled at farming, fishing, and hunting, and the Northmen, who are more war-oriented and have often raided the lands of the folk. Folk is spelt with two Fs, F-F-O-L-K. At Iron Keep, many kings of the Northmen were gathering to bolster their armies for a summer of raiding. We briefly switch back to the Earth Mother, who knows there is something wrong with the Isles and begins to awaken her children, but we'll get back to them later. Back in Caer Corwell, Arion is seduced by the beast in human form and is then corrupted and twisted by the power of the Darkwell into something mighty and evil. Tristan, Robin, and Dareth then spend time at the festival in the city, and we learn more about the Isles, notably that worship of the gods of Faerun has been brought by clerics to the Moonshae Isles, though it's still not as popular as the druids who worship the Earth Mother. Speaking of druids, Robin, who spends a good amount of time with the druids, leads her friends to a grove where Tristan receives a warning of dire threats menacing even the power of the goddess, the Earth Mother, herself. Speaking of the goddess, as the beast, Khazgoroth, moved in stealth gathering forces, the Earth Mother sent a call to awaken the first of her children, the great beast beneath the seas, the Leviathan. And though I didn't really connect the dots within the novel, according to the sourcebook Moonshae, written by Douglas Niles, the Leviathan is a massive whale, 360 feet or 110 meters long. Meanwhile, Khazgoroth took on the form of a dryad and struck out at the druid Traherne, who was on his way to an emergency council of druids, summoned by the High Druid of Gwyneth, Genna Moonsinger. The beast corrupted Traherne, and as the gathering took place, we learn the Earth Mother's power is waning, and that she may not awaken from her next wintry slumber. We then go back to Arion, who we see transform into a wolf, hinting at his dark nature and foreshadowing the future. At the same time, the Earth Mother's next child awakens, the Pack. The Pack is a group of wolves united as one mind and one will. At first, the Pack numbers in the hundreds, but it soon grows to thousands of wolves. During all of this time, Tristan, Robin, Dareth, Paldo, Canthus, and Arlen, the captain of the King's Guard and Tristan's teacher in most things, go on a hunting trip, which turns sour as the group discovers the tracks of a furbolg and decide to follow it, leading them far off their usual hunting route and way out into dangerous territory. This is mostly due to Tristan's own arrogance, turning this trip into an attempt at trying to prove himself to his father, a typical case of main character making a stupid decision with little foresight syndrome. They ride directly into an ambush, where in the stress of the moment, Robin discovers some druidic powers she didn't know she had, and Arlen is unfortunately slain, an unfortunate victim of Tristan's stupidity. Before the rest of the party can meet the same fate, they are saved by a mysterious figure and his falcon companion, who introduces himself as Caran Donnell, the most famous bard among all of the folk. While that is going on, we are introduced to the final of the Earth Mother's children, Cameron, the unicorn. But that's just an introduction, more on him later. As Tristan and company return to the castle to heal and have a funeral service for their departed friend, the beast continued to gather allies, now changing its sights to the Northmen. The beast slew Thelgar Ironhand, took on the form of the dead king, and declared that his force would join the other kings in going to war. Reports of gathering Northmen finally reached Corwell. With Arlen gone, Tristan was required to take command of the city's company in the upcoming expected battle, a responsibility which he was not prepared for, as throughout the novel he is both shown and said to be a carefree, adventuring, partying-style prince, reaping the rewards of his birth without preparing to bear that responsibility himself. Moving ahead, Cameron the Unicorn was attacked and kidnapped by furbolgs, and the main cast discovers Caran Donnell, who is just recently departed from them, was in danger as his falcon appeared in the sky to lead them to him. The party journeyed to Mirlock Vale, a magical valley at the heart of the island of Gwyneth, and encountered their newest trickster companion, Newt, the fairy dragon, who leads them toward the Firbolg's lair. Honestly, Newt is probably one of the most entertaining characters in the trilogy, for no other reason than how unseriously he takes everything. They all venture into the Firbolg's lair through a back tunnel Newt had seen. While searching for Karen, they found a treasure room, allowing the party to get a massive upgrade. Paldo picked out some of the most valuable treasures and filled his travel pack with riches. Dareth collected a scimitar and an assortment of gem-encrusted rings. Robin seized a silver torque, a druidic ornament worn like a necklace, and Tristan received a glowing silver longsword with an ancient battered hilt. Finally, they discovered Karen's famous longbow and retrieved it for him. As they were doing this, Cameron broke free from its cage within the Firbolg lair. Seeking freedom, it wasn't long before the party discovered him roaming the tunnels. And soon after, they rescued Karen along with a new companion, a dwarven woman named Finnelan. And I would like to mention that she did have a marvelous beard that dropped past her belt line, which earns the novel some brownie points from me. Dwarves can shave if they want to, but whenever sourcebooks say only male dwarves have beards, I find it utterly disappointing. I would like to mention that at this point in recording the script, I went back and double-checked my pronunciation of Firbolg. I have always said Firbolg. In this script, for some reason, I have been saying Firbolg. It's not, it's Firbolg. Anyways, back to the story. After the rescue, the party got into combat with some Firbolgs, where we discover that Tristan's sword has some extra power to it. When he struck a Firbolg, the wound burned the skin of the giant, and when his blade clashed with another, the Firbolg's sword shattered into 100 pieces. Karen confirms that this is the lost sword of Cymric Hugh, a sword once belonging to the greatest hero in folk history, and said to have been given to Cymric by the goddess herself. Cymric was the first of the High Kings, the man who united all of the Moonshae under a strong, wise rule. As the adventurers and the unicorn escape from the lair, they set fire to the supporting structure to remove this affront to the goddess from the land. During this time, Khazgaroth, in the form of Thelgar Ironhand, led his newly acquired fleet onward toward Gwynedd. Though the beast was aware of the obstacle he would face on the way there, the Leviathan, his crew was not. The ships of the fleet were outfitted with enchanted and poisoned heavy battering rams to strike the Leviathan as it emerged. The Leviathan destroyed several ships before the rams struck the majestic creature. As the rams did their damage, Khazgaroth heaved a mighty harpoon of black corroded steel thicker than a giant's wrist with wicked barbs and a putrid essence, and struck the Leviathan behind one of its eyes, slaying the creature. But the death of the Leviathan did not go unavenged. The sea itself steamed and churned, fire erupted from the depths, and 20-foot waves crashed along the ships. About 4 dozen ships were said to have been wrecked in the sea's vengeance. Meanwhile, Grunark the Red was sent around to strike from another side of Gwynedd, torching villages and enslaving survivors, as well as delivering the Blood Riders, corrupted mounted fighters with supernatural skill, to be his shock troops. Though they followed the will of the beast more than the commands of Grunark. On the journey home, Tristan and his new allies saw the signs of destruction and fought against more Firbolgs and Northmen. One night of camping led to Tristan discovering a white horse in the woods, which carried him deep into the forest on its own. There, Tristan discovered the Sisters of Cynoria, warriors of the Ewer. The Ewer are the elves of the Moonshae Isles, who many humans thought to be extinct at the time. The Sisters of Cynoria pledged their service to Tristan, and led his party through Cynoria, where the non-Ewer needed to be blindfolded and restrained to not be driven mad by the beauty of the forest. The Sisters of Cynoria play a significant role in the party's journey back home, though unfortunately most of that is during combat, which is really easy to gloss over when summarizing. I just want to say that as someone who really likes elves, I personally think they were interesting characters. I just don't talk about them a lot in the review. The dark forces of the beast were also making progress, and Arian, now in wolf form, attacked the lead wolf of the pack and replaced him at its head, thereby turning the pack to evil, which I just feel is a massive flaw in the whole system of the pack. It said earlier that the pack had slept for hundreds of years, so I thought they were like immortal wolves. But now I think either the lead wolf or the hive mind was what slept until now. But seriously, one domino knocked the whole thing over? That's just poor planning on the Earth Mother's part. But don't worry, we'll come back to this later. Moving ahead, because these next parts aren't too important to the review, the Sisters of Cynoria, folk survivors, dwarven allies, and the main cast fought some of the Northmen, Blood Riders, and Firbolgs. I don't want to understate the quality of writing when it comes to how well the combat scenes are written, even though I've only mentioned the results of each battle up to this point. The battle scenes are written in a way that make you feel energized and invested. It's written dynamically, so it's not just explanations of moves, it's kind of the whole cause and effect of every single thing they do in combat. But I'm only covering the major points in the story so everyone has context for what I'm talking about when I give my opinions on certain things, and combat kind of flies under that radar. Canthus ended up being separated from the group and was found by Genna Moonsinger, who sent him on a mission of his own. Speeding through this next part, we finally get to the city of Corwell, where it is revealed by the king that Robin was the daughter of Brianna Moonsinger, the former great druid of the Isles of Moonshae. Brianna left Robin with the king before she left to travel to a moonwell in Mirlock Vale in hopes of cleansing it. She left for her daughter 2 items, the Staff of the White Well and a heavy locked leather tome. The king was injured, so Tristan took up leading the fight. Again, I'm not doing justice to the writing by skipping the major battle, but between the Blood Riders leaping over the castle walls on flying horses, fighting Firbolgs to hold the gate, and the displays of magic, the war felt so epic and grand in scale that I truly have to recommend that you read it for yourself. Back to the pack, Canthus was given a spiked iron collar and sent to fight Arian so he could replace him as leader of the pack. The fight went really poorly for Canthus, as it's a dog fighting a werewolf, but once the iron collar broke, a silver torque was revealed underneath, which gave Canthus just the opening he needed to defeat Arian. Honestly, despite how absurd this seems, I couldn't help but being excited for Canthus as he fought and then led the pack to war against the Northmen, though it was still a little bit of a deus ex machina, kind of a bit plot-heavy. The first stage of fighting the beast happened within Corwell, where the 2 armies clashed until the beast was so filled with rage at its army being routed that it returned to its true form. And once again, the picture I formed in my head for Khazgoroth based on the description was not what he apparently was. For some reason, I thought the description was more of a humanoid creature with a tail and a large mouth that displayed his vicious teeth. But according to the sourcebook Moonshae, he's a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The Sword of Khymric Hugh, of course, turned out to be the secret weapon against the beast. Earlier in the novel, it was said that Khymric Hugh was slain by an evil creature, and the one who found the blade would be destined to defeat the monster. And that's kind of my problem with prophecies in media in general, books, TV, whatever. Obviously, I know the protagonist is going to succeed in most cases, but normally there's still the question of how, or it could be a much different ending than expected, but straight up saying, here's how the story plays out, and this is exactly how the thing ends, takes me out of the story somewhat. But this isn't a major critique for this book specifically, that's just a personal preference for stuff in general. Anyways, the beast retreats to the Darkwell, as well as a Blood Rider who kidnaps Robin. The final battle takes place there, with all the friends reuniting to fight this ancient evil. For a moment, until Karen was reduced to nothing by the beast, and then Tristan struck the final blow. However, that was not the end of the threat, as the corrupted druid, Traherne, later found his way to the cleansed Darkwell and found within its depths a skull-sized object as black as coal, the heart of Khazgaroth. Now that I've given you a majority of the major information about the characters, the rest of the review should be a little bit faster paced because you're introduced to everyone. Book 2 of the Moonshae Trilogy, Black Wizards, takes place 1 year after the ending of Darkwalker on Moonshae. We learn there were 4 kings of the folk. The kingdoms of Corwell, Moray, and Snowdown owed fealty to Caladir, for King Caladir was High King of all the folk. We also learn that the great druid Genna Moonsinger is actually Robin's aunt, and Robin went to study under her. And most importantly, we learn that Khazgaroth was actually a servant, sometimes considered an aspect, of Baal, the god of death in the Forgotten Realms at the time. Which started to tie the story in with the grander setting more than it initially seemed, so I enjoyed learning that. But Baal was mad, and destroying his servant meant only one thing: revenge. We got all of that information in a very quick blurb at the beginning, kind of like, I guess a prologue, but not really a prologue, like an introduction almost to the book. After that introduction, the next scene is of a group of wizards called the Council of Seven, led by the wizard Sindri. Sindri speaks to an assassin, a half-orc named Rosfollow, and it's implied he's contracted this assassin and his crew in the past. This time, Rosfollow and his crew are sent after Tristan, Robin, and King Byron, and offered a bonus if they bring back Tristan's sword. The only explanation we're given at this time is that the prince is a menace to the Council of Seven's ambitions. The others seem to just be collateral damage. The book then switches over to said collateral damage, specifically Robin and Newt. As Robin was learning under the tutelage of Genna Moonsinger, a shaggy man with matted hair and beard wandered into her grove before collapsing. The book doesn't tell us the identity of this man for a while, but I'm pretty sure most people reading, and even some of you following along in this video, can take a guess. We first read about Tristan in the book as he's arguing with his father about how he conducts himself as a prince, fairly standard for them as Tristan is fairly flippant towards royal responsibilities, though he simultaneously wants his father to take him seriously. This argument lasts until the assassins charge in and attack them. The attempt was interrupted by Dareth and Canthus, but not before a poisoned dart took the king's life. But even more, this scene set up that Dareth recognized the leader of the assassins, even calling him by name. And I just have to say, that is quite an opening. Normally the second book in any given trilogy I find less interesting. The first sets up these new characters and sometimes a new setting, and the final one is an epic climax to the story. But Black Wizards is an outlier among second novels, and starts pretty strong. I'm not saying it's amazing, but it caught my interest, which doesn't happen often. Now we get into what I was talking about earlier with Dareth's backstory. He tells Tristan that the assassins were from the Academy of Stealth in Calimshan. He knows this because he recognizes the uniforms, but we learn that he once studied there, not because he tells us this, but because Tristan's internal monologue lets us know Dareth told him he had studied at the Academy of Stealth. But then Dareth briefly tells us his history with Rosfollow, the half-orc leader of these particular assassins. And I just felt it was weird that we get half the information through Tristan's thoughts and the other half from Dareth in a very brief bout of exposition. It seemed a bit fast-paced to me, but that doesn't matter too much. So now, with the king's death, there's this whole thing with Tristan needing to make himself appear like a reliable leader because some of the nobles are on their way to make their case for the crown after the king's death. The meeting was a whole lot of posturing and arguing before Tristan decided to travel to Caer Caladir to petition the High King for the throne of Corwell. and his leading rival, Lord Pontswain, decided to go with him for the same purpose. Meanwhile, we learn that this Council of Seven is actually in service to the High King, though it's mostly Sindri running things, and they're in league with a cleric of Baal. Furthermore, they team up with a clan of Duergar for later nefarious purposes. For some time, the novel switches between Robin and the Crazy Man, Tristan, Pontswain and their traveling companions, the wizards, the cleric of Baal, and the odd interjection of how the Earth Mother feels. Bad. She feels bad, just to keep you all updated. She hasn't recovered from the events of the first book, and Baal keeps trying to make things worse. Thankfully, another goddess, one from the same pantheon as Baal, decided to lend her aid to the Earth Mother. Thus, Shantea, goddess of agriculture and growth, entered the fray. During a storm, Tristan, Dareth, Pontswain, and Canthus were lost at sea, only for a castle to rise from the ocean before them. As they investigate, Tristan tells us that this is a legendary castle, the resting place of Alysanne, the queen and bride of Cymric Hugh. Cymric ordered that the castle become her tomb and had druids sink the tiny island it stood on. In this castle, they encounter and fight Sahuagin, undersea fish-like humanoids, a staple for any story including sea monsters or sea encounters. Tristan lost the sword of Cymric Hugh in the storm, but within the castle, Dareth found these really cool gloves, which are simply gloves of thievery, but Douglas Niles' description of the item made them seem much cooler than their statistics would actually imply. With material that matches the skin tone of the wielder when they wear them, and slim, hidden lockpicks. Tristan discovered the altar and glass coffin of Alysanne. When he approached, she sat up, out of the case that had no top, and greeted Tristan, returning the sword of Cymric Hugh to him to hold until he found the true bearer. Of course, she also tells Tristan that he has a destiny, which, as we recall from earlier, I love hearing about in novels. Tristan's destiny is to find the next High King of the folk. He would know the king with his heart, but also by the following. Quote, "His name shall be Cymric, and he will bear that sword. His destiny will carry him many places. He shall fly above the earth, even as he delves its depth. Wind and fire, earth and sea, all shall fight for him, when it is time for him to claim his throne." End quote. I almost find it disappointing that it didn't rhyme, but oh well. Then we go to the current High King, who is just disappointing all around. Not from a character writing perspective, he's well written, but he's written to be dislikable. We see that this king and his sorcerer Sindri, the leader of the Council of Seven, have recruited a brigade of ogres and have sent them to attack Tristan, because Sindri told the king that Tristan was a threat, and the spineless crown holder listened. Tristan, meanwhile, leaves the castle with Dareth, Canthus, and Pontswain, and is rescued by Tavish, another bard companion. This seems to be a recurring theme. Place your bets, folks. Does she die and get replaced in the next novel? We shall see. Anyways, she brings them to the Diving Dolphin Inn, and Paldo happens to be nearby. They attempt to meet up, but not before Tristan is arrested for treason against the crown. Meanwhile, Robin is having a difficult time with the Madman, which only gets worse once the Cleric of Baal shows up and retrieves the heart of Khazgarath from the Madman, who we discover, to no one's surprise, is actually the corrupted druid Traherne. In response to this dangerous turn of events, the Earth Mother summoned Cameron the Unicorn once again. Paldo breaks Tristan and company out of prison, and the group has yet another run-in with Rosfollow and the assassins. They escape, but Tristan gets injured. Now that I'm skimming through the book once again, there may be more interactions between Dareth and Rosfollow than I initially remembered, but it's still not as much as I would have liked. At this point in the book, we also learn that Sindri is performing some enchantments on the king to make him easier to manipulate. Oh, and that Cleric of Baal, he doesn't take the heart of Khazgarath and run, he uses it to increase his power, raise undead foes, and is now intent on using Robin for a ritual sacrifice to Baal. Meanwhile, Robin has a disturbing dream about King Byron and Tristan and wants to put her studies on pause to see what's wrong. This is like halfway through the novel, which seems late in a story to have allies join when I think of most novels, but at the same time, it's a much better way to do it because it allows us to learn more of what's going on in different parts of the Isles, while still focusing on characters we're interested in hearing about rather than random interjections between chapters. Cough cough, Elminster novels, cough cough. Robin and Genna eventually have to flee from the grove in the face of overwhelming undead forces, but one moment I especially like during their fight against the undead is when Genna tells some of the druid companions they meet up with about the magical barrier around the Moonwell that prevents evil from getting in. One of the druids asked how the undead passed the barrier. Genna responds by informing them all that mindless undead are not inherently evil, they're just driven by a foul command. And I know some spells and abilities say otherwise throughout the editions of D&D, but I like it when a character or story clarifies that magic is simply magic. It's the intent that changes it from good to evil. Raising skeletons from the grave? Disturbing, sure, but whether they are used to till soil or attack intruders can be a world of difference for most people, except paladins. Paladins are super judgmental, which is part of their class, but I still find most of them annoying. Anyways, back to the story. We then get to the return of a familiar bearded face, Finolin the dwarf, as she and her dwarven companions march towards the reports of Dwergar in the tunnels beneath the Moonshae Isles. At the same time, Tristan and Dareth decide it's time for them to sneak into the castle after talking to many of the kingdom's citizens and learning just how corrupt the High King is. Meanwhile, Robin is kidnapped by the Cleric of Baal, and the other druids were overwhelmed by undead. To save them all from a terrible fate, Genna prayed to the Earth Mother, and in response, the druids were all turned to stone. I mean, I suppose that did technically work, but I didn't think the Earth Mother operated on genie rules. Please, Earth Mother, save us! No worries, I understand completely. Whoosh, petrification. A good while later in the book, Baal commands his cleric to throw the fallen undead into the Moonwell nearby, and in doing so corrupted the well. Back to the infiltration of the castle, Dareth and Tristan both proved to be incredible actors, switching back and forth between using intimidation, deception, and persuasion to journey through the castle and directly before the High King. Finally, we get to one of my favorite parts in this novel, and this may seem out of place, but it was interesting to me. Like in the first novel, our villain continues to gather allies throughout the story, and Sindri's newest addition to his forces were the Sahuagin. Every novel that I have read that has used Sahuagin has used them well. Because their lore is so condensed and simple, it makes them easy to integrate into stories. And because they are aquatic creatures, they often present a new dimension of difficulty for the protagonists. Now, this series isn't the best representation of the Sahuagin, as they are a supporting antagonist in the story, but learning that the largest city among the Moonshae Isles is an underwater metropolis known as Chrysilas, populated by Sahuagin, makes them an enormous threat right off the bat. On the mainland, Robin was rescued by Cameron, and then she encounters the spirit of Allison, who directed her toward Tristan, warning her that he awaits his death, before the spirit disappeared. Tristan, of course, was in danger, as Sindri bested him and his comrades. While imprisoned, Tristan sees Allison again, and during their conversation, he professes his love for Allison. Really, he spent all of the first novel being incredibly jealous of Robin's friendliness towards Dareth, and he spent the first part of this novel constantly thinking about her. I mean, seriously, the moment he sees another pretty woman, he just forgets Robin. And this is foreshadowing for the next novel, which I will get into later, just you wait. Tristan was interrogated and then sent for execution. Meanwhile, Dareth slipped his bonds and retrieved their weapons. When he couldn't find Tristan, he decided to free a prisoner in a magically silent cell after recalling the innocent people the king was said to have imprisoned. This prisoner turned out to be Alexei, an ex-member of the Council of Seven whose hands were mangled by Sindri before being imprisoned when Sindri saw him as a threat to his position of power. Alexei guided Dareth and Tristan toward a hidden storage room of magic items to aid them in their escape and revealed Sindri's goal of ruling a large kingdom. That's it. His goal is nothing personal, he just wants to exploit a large kingdom for his own gain, and a divided kingdom with a weak ruler like the Land of the Folk was an ideal candidate. Their escape led them underground and into the waiting arms of the Duergar. Thankfully, magical flight allowed them to escape their foes and run into some unexpected allies, Finolin and her company of dwarves. Robin, meanwhile, was also flying, just in the form of an eagle, when she was attacked by crows and knocked out of the sky, only to be apprehended by some rebels against the High King that Tristan had met earlier in his travels in this novel. Tristan, Dareth, and Alexei returned to these rebels soon after, and went to find Robin once they heard she was nearby. At the moment, Robin was being attacked by a mage from the Council of Seven who had infiltrated the rebels. Robin won her fight and met up with Tristan. However, the rebels had also been infiltrated by Rosfollow and his assassins. Dareth encountered him, fought, and won. And while I am, of course, summarizing this major moment, they quite literally met each other on the street and just fought right there. It felt like a very rushed conclusion to Dareth's backstory. It was like 2 pages and didn't even happen during the final confrontation. Speaking of the final confrontation, the book's conclusion happens once all the forces gather together. Tristan, Robin, Paldo, Dareth, Finolin, the dwarves, and the rebels on one side, the Council of Seven, ogres, the king and his army, the Sahuagin, the undead, and the Duergar on the other. I won't spoil how the battle plays out because it's irrelevant to my review, and it's pretty good if you choose to read it. A good length, not rushed like many novels, and very action-packed. But after the fact, the survivors recall how the battle played out, and specifically, the prophecy. Tristan discovers that throughout his adventures, he accomplished all the deeds noted in the prophecy. But the final issue was that Tristan's name wasn't Kymric. Except, it was. Finolin, with her vast lifespan of 4 centuries, had seen the evolution of the name Kymric, and one of those evolutions was the name Kendrick, as in Tristan Kendrick. Now, honestly, this seems obvious after the fact, but earlier in the novel, I was expecting a twist. Like Dareth would turn out to be a descendant of Kymric Hugh or something. But either way, this was a pretty fun reveal with some really good build-up. And to verify this revelation, a fountain of water dropped the crown of the Isles directly before his feet. Thusly, Tristan Kendrick became High King of the Moonshae Isles. Now we get into the final novel in the trilogy, Darkwell. Most of this novel can be summarized very quickly, but there are 2 specific instances that I want to talk about, and we will get to those in a bit. The main villain of this novel is Ball. Since the corruption of the Mirlock Vale Moonwell, the Earth Mother has been dying, and Ball has been using this new Darkwell to destroy the land and grow in power. Tristan, Robin, and the rest start the novel sailing back to Cair Corwell, encountering a few Northman ships, which causes Robin to just straight up split one in half by shaping the wood of their hull from a distance, demonstrating exactly why I dislike certain spells in seafaring combat, but don't get me started on control water. Before they can fight more, some Sahuagin attack, causing the humans to work together. It turns out that King Grunark the Red was actually leading this fleet of ships, and after the fight with the Sahuagin, he gives Robin a scroll tube he plundered a while back, for no reason other than he thinks she should have it. Tristan invites Grunark back to Corwell to discuss the dangers that still infect their lands. Meanwhile, Ball uses his cleric and forces to lead the natural wildlife toward the Darkwell and consume them. Ball also has his cleric touch the heart of Khazgaroth to the now petrified form of the great druid Genna Moonsinger. The heart phased into the statue and brought Genna back to life as an agent of Ball. This new Genna-Khazgaroth fusion is sent to Caer Corwell to perform a certain task. She arrived at Corwell at the same time as Tristan and Grunark, and once she did, she took on the form of a beautiful young woman. While she was doing that, Ball decided to copy the Earth Mother. Her children were allies to the folk against Khazgaroth, so he would make children to help him further his destruction of the world. These 3 children were an owlbear called Thorax, a flock of Periton, which we can probably just call the flock in mirroring the Earth Mother's pack, and finally Shantu, a displacer beast and the king of the children of Ball. Back in Caer Corwell, the citizens are celebrating the return of High King Tristan, and negotiations are underway for an alliance between Grunark and Tristan. But now we also reach one of my biggest talking points for this novel, or part 1 of this point at least. Tristan asks Robin to be his wife, stating that he will announce it during the celebrations. Robin says she can't, not right then. She feels that she is the last druid on the Isles, and her task is to free the other druids in order to help the Earth Mother. She says that if she succeeds, she will turn down the offer she received to become the next great druid and marry Tristan. But if she can't free the other druids, she is the only hope of continuing her order of druids. In doing so, she would take up the mantle of Great Druid, one of the requirements of which is to remain chaste, for some reason. Tristan is obviously sad, but seems accepting of this. However, throughout the night, Tristan gets a little too deep into his cups and becomes very aware of this incredibly beautiful woman at the feast who no one seems to know. Tristan followed this woman to his bedchambers and ended up laying with her. As you can probably guess, this was the transformed Genna Moonsinger. Robin discovered them like this, and was obviously quite distraught that Tristan just forgot about her and moved on when she simply asked him to wait for a while. Feeling betrayed, she returned to her room looking for a distraction. This is when Robin opened the scrolls she received from Grunark. These scrolls were filled with runes and writing about the planes, the gods, the elements, and clerical worship. Sadly, Robin wasn't able to cope with books the same way I can, and her grief caused her to leave the kingdom and try to help the druids on her own. I want everyone to remember this because I will talk about it more later. Tristan had tried to go to Robin's room to explain himself, but she doesn't answer his knock, and in his anger, he started to blame the woman he slept with, and he was actually storming back to his room, ready to strike her. It says this in the novel, as if this wasn't his own fault. But the woman was already gone, and geez, this is a bad look for the High King. And we just keep piling it on because over the next few sentences, we are told through the narration that Tristan was actually convincing himself of his own lie, that this woman enchanted him into betraying Robin. Listen, I know flawed characters are generally better, but Tristan's actions throughout this novel cause my opinion of him to plummet. And we are only about a quarter of the way through the novel. And I'm not the only one. When Tristan returns to the party, his friends clearly didn't miss him wandering out with a strange pretty woman, because Paldo won't even look at him, and Dareth was seriously not too happy. Tristan then announces he's going to Mirlock Vale to destroy the cleric of Ball that resides there now. So Dareth, Paldo, and their bard friend Tavish, who actually did survive the last novel, all announce that they are going with him. It wasn't until after all of this that Robin's silence worried Tristan, so he broke into her room and noticed that she, her scrolls, and staff were gone, and the window was wide open. Robin, meanwhile, had almost immediately met with danger upon reaching Murloc Vale, crashing during a storm and being seriously injured. Thankfully, one of her scrolls had healing magics, so she managed to patch herself up before continuing on foot, only to be attacked by Peritons on the mountainside. The next section of the novel focuses on Tristan and his companions traveling into Murloc Vale and finally meeting up with Robin. But now we reach my second talking point, and I know I warned you all about spoilers earlier, and this is the spoiler section of the video. But this next part I need to stress. If you intend to read this book, you probably want to skip this next part. In fact, I recommend skipping this part if you want to read this trilogy. I will make a timestamp in the video and make this a chapter so you can skip past this if you want, but this is probably the biggest part of this novel, and I'm only talking about this in this section. Final warning, skip ahead if you intend to read this book. Just before the party met up with Robin, Dareth and Tristan got into a heated argument. And I mean just before, because Tristan yells at Dareth to leave, so Dareth goes on a walk to cool off. And not long after, Robin happens upon their camp. Up until this point, we've gotten some smaller segments where the novel focuses on the children of Baal wandering around the Vale, the most notable of which is Shantu, the Displacer Beast. Dareth, alone in the corrupted woods, feels a presence watching him. This entire part of the novel had my heart racing, because it is entirely anticipation. Dareth waiting, stealthily moving to try and hear his pursuer, drawing his blade to prepare, and then nothing. He moves again, he waits, he prepares, nothing. And just as he decided to go back to camp, he heard growling. Still no action, just suspense. We know what's out there, but it's the dead of night. Dareth can't see. Finally, we get into the action. Dareth is trying to escape this massive creature that he can barely see. The most he can reliably see is the creature's yellow eyes, and even then, this is a displacer beast. That's an illusion. He doesn't even know that. Dareth climbs rock faces, dodges through trees, and at one point sustains a massively serious injury. Something so terrible that I felt my stomach turn as it was described in the book. Now, I won't detail the injury in case anyone is squeamish, but I will say I've read some books with intense combat, but the way Douglas Niles describes what happened, not in an overly graphic way, mind you, but in a way that makes you understand the severity. This adrenaline-pumping battle lasts for pages and pages, with very brief interruptions when we swap to the other characters. In the end, and to my utter surprise, Dareth doesn't make it. One of our main characters, with us since the first chapter of the first book of this trilogy, dies. I'm so used to seeing supporting characters die, or fake-out deaths for main characters, that I genuinely wasn't expecting this, especially in a trilogy where, up until this point, they've beaten the odds time and time again. But suffice to say, this was one of the most well-written scenes I have read from a Forgotten Realms novel. It drew me in and kept me glued to the book from the start of the scene to the end. Tristan and the rest of the adventurers did stumble upon Dareth's body later, and gave Dareth a brief funeral service, and obviously Tristan was just racked with guilt, as he should be. But their moments mourning him were not, I think, as powerful as the actual scene itself. Alright, now to the rest of the story. The rest of the novel is Tristan and company traversing Myrloc Vale and all its threats, even charming and teaming up with a Firbolg. A majority of this book is the party in Myrloc Vale, but despite that, I never actually felt that the novel dragged on. It is a really good sign when an author can make a large portion of travel entertaining to a reader. Things were constantly happening, nothing major enough that I feel I need to cover it, but also enough that I don't feel I should complain about the time the party spent traveling. And this also brings me back to one of my earlier points about how these novels have good pacing. Some of the books would have rushed their time in the Vale, placing it all within the last 3 chapters or so as they briefly plow their way through this treacherous land in order to get to the area they need to be. Not in this book. This book was very well done. While our protagonists were braving the Myrloc Vale, the rest of the Moonshae Isles, folk and Northmen alike, were busy in a united battle against the undead and Sahuagin forces that Ball had employed. I don't have much to say about this. It wasn't something that stuck in my mind after finishing the series, but that's neither good nor bad. It means that there was nothing wrong that annoyed me enough to remember, but neither was there anything exciting enough to remember. The final confrontation in this novel is a mighty fight between our party and the forces of Ball, including an avatar of Ball brought to the Prime Material through the Darkwell itself. The battle is interesting, but not enough that I need to detail it. Sadly, over the course of this novel, the Earth Mother had perished. However, thanks to her scrolls, Robin found her faith in nature bolstered by the goddess Shantea, who became the new force of nature in the Isles. But now is when I can finally finish my thoughts from earlier. With their foes defeated, Tristan finally turns to Robin and owns up for his mistakes, specifically in sleeping with Genna Khazgoroth. Though what really caught me off guard was how quickly Robin forgave him. She even said something along the lines of, even though Tristan wasn't bewitched, her anger was bewitching her. I know this should be a touching moment, but I also know the author is trying to tie up any loose ends to conclude the trilogy. But I just felt this should have been a "we will work through this" moment, rather than an "all is forgiven" scene, you know? The novel ends with the revelation that the Earth Mother is truly gone. The new spells wielded by Robin are those of the goddess Shantea. Tristan asks if Shantea allows her clerics to marry, and Robin cheekily says that she would ask after their children are grown. Again, really easily forgiven, but the novel's wrapping up, so I'll overlook it. The epilogue informs us that the Isles are recovering well from the evil that occupied it, and it isn't long before Tristan and Robin's first child, Princess Alicia, is born. But the wild nature of the Isles started occupying smaller portions of the land, as Shantea's influence caused the folk to expand their farmland, and many people viewed this change favorably. But with all that said, we reach the end of my review of the Moonshae Trilogy by Douglas Niles. All in all, these are very well-written novels, with interesting characters, interesting plots, and very few minor issues that are mostly subject to personal opinion. If you've read the Moonshae Trilogy, feel free to share your opinions on it in the comments. I'm interested in hearing what you all think of these novels. I hope you've all enjoyed this review. If you have, you can like the video, comment, or subscribe to show your support. I've read a lot of the Forgotten Realms novels, so you can expect more of these in the future. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!